Hello, hello, hello. I am Avery, and welcome to my Pika's Awesome Draft League 3 Week 1 coverage. Now, at the time this is uploaded, I'll have been probably done with Week 2, and because I'm adding a week offset just to make it easier for me to get the videos out consistently and put less pressure on myself. So just know that going forward, if you're one of the people who's actively spectating Pika's Awesome Draft League 3, you probably will get spoilers for the next week if you're keeping up with just my videos in a hypothetical scenario. This week, I was up against my friend Matt. This is the third time Matt and I have played in a draft league, which is pretty remarkable considering that this is my 6th draft league. Wait, no, it's my 4th time playing Matt within 6 draft leagues, which is pretty funny. Yeah, and Matt's team is scary as hell. The biggest threat on his team was, Mew. Mew has so many different moves that it's really hard to prepare for Mew, because in testing I was scared about Mental Herb, Dragon Dance, Earthquake Mew. That's a big threat. There's Will-O-Wisp Hazards Mew, there's Special Setup Mew, there's just not set up at all Mew, just using powerful attacks. So Mew was a big threat. And then there were some other mons that did cause some of my Pokemon problems, but, mostly it was about, trying to deal with Mew, Garganacl, and to a lesser extent, Ogerpon. So yeah, one of the most important mons that I decided to bring in this matchup was Iron Moth, and that's because Matt has no grounded poison type, which means that once I set up T-Spikes, it's going to be very hard for him to remove it. So I had this Iron Moth with booster energy, a lot of special attack investment so that I get the special attack boost so I can 2-hit KO Garganacl with Energy Ball, just to open up more avenues for my Iron Hands. Second Pokemon I brought was Screamtail. Screamtail has rocks, resists Mew's psychic moves, and generally has enough bulk to just eat any hit from Mew. I also have Psychic Noise to stop Pokemon from recovering, mostly Garganacl, but also Mew. And then I had Fire Blast so that I could hit Goldengo. Additionally, I had Rocks and Roar. Rocks was just to gather more residual damage on defensive switch-ins, and Roar was so that I could stop Mew from setting up without having to risk encoring into a Mental Herb. I was Booster Energy again so that I could outspeed both Mew and Ogerpon, because Screamtail is naturally faster than both of them, so I was Booster Energy Speed just to get the jump on them, which is a remnant from when I was Encore instead of Roar. In hindsight, I could have ran something else, but honestly, I think that, the threat of the speed of Screamtail is still, valuable, because you reach speed tiers that are slightly higher, and you're able to pick off something like a weakened Zeraora. My next Pokemon was Iron Hands with a Covert Cloak, just so that I could absolutely tank Garganacl Salt Cures. I was a bit worried about Curse Earthquake Garganacl threatening my Iron Hands, but I realized that it was pretty unlikely because Matt, besides Mew, doesn't have any mons that could set up Stealth Rock, so I was okay with running a Terra type that was still weak to ground, especially because Fire gives me the opportunity for an emergency burn immunity, but even then I had Facade because, as you'll see later, I was trying to save my Terra for another mon. So I'm just Covert Cloak with a good amount of attack. I believe it's to 2-hit KO, something guaranteed. I forgot what the exact investment was, but the speed was to I believe was to speed creep a Bouffalant that was speed creeping an Iron Hands. That was speed creeping a Bouffalant that was speed creeping an Iron Hands. So 3 layers of speed creep. Yeah, I had Supercell Slam just for the stronger hit on Pokemon like Mew, Drain Punch to stay healthy, Facade for if I ever get burned, or I guess more rarely Poison for whatever reason, and Swords Dance so that I could boost past Pokemon like Garganacl. My next Pokemon was Terapagos. Terapagos was my dedicated lead for if Matt brought Ribombee. I have Terra Starstorm just for the strong neutral damage, Heavy Slam with 64 attack, even with the negative nature that kills max HP Ribombee, and a Lumberry, which means that essentially if Ribombee tries to Stun Spore turn 1 as I Rapid Spin, I then become faster than Ribombee, always KO with Heavy Slam, and I'm not parried. And then I can click something like Dark Pulse against one of the ghosts. In hindsight, it was probably better to go with Earth Power, since I had that Steel-type move that I could use to break Goldengo's balloon. But I ended up opting for Dark Pulse instead, which I think, again, was a remnant of when I didn't have Heavy Slam on this set. Next Pokemon, this is my main win condition. It is Blastoise, just classic Shell Smash set with a White Herb. Terra Electric to resist Plasma Fist and take very little damage from almost anything that Zeraora wants to go for. Torrent, because I'm not setting up the rain. 48 attack with Timid, so that I could guaranteed Oko and Assault Vest Zeraora at +2 attack. This came about because I had to rely too much on Hydro Pump in mocks, and I was like, I need just like a consistent move that I can use to kill a weakened Goldengo or a Zeraora. So I ended up going for Earthquake. Fuck. Okay, so this says Ice Burn. That is my bad. My Blastoise does not have Ice Burn. I have Ice Beam. But the data validation on the Excel sheet that I used to create like part of these images, I just did Ice B and then enter. And I guess it did burn for whatever reason. Yeah, Hydro Pump, Ice Beam, Earthquake, Shell Smash. Hydro Pump is able to 2-hit KO Garganacl / Oko it if it is still a rock type or a type that is weak to water. Ice Beam, 1-hit KOs Ogerpon at +2, and I talked about Earthquake a little bit earlier. And the last one I have, just the glue, and my main check to Ogerpon, is a physically defensive Tornadus Therian with heavy-duty boots. This investment lets me survive a +2 Expert Belt Ogerpon Rock Tomb, and with my EVs, I'm naturally faster, which essentially forces it to terrestrialize if it wants to be a threat to me. I have Weak Wind Storm just for the slightly more consistent flying stab that actually does damage to Ogerpon. Plus, if I get the speed drop on it, that means that I can, like if it terrestrializes and then I get the speed drop, I can follow up on that with another attack to knock out Ogerpon. U-turn, just to keep the momentum up. Knock off, primarily to remove leftovers on Garganacl. And Heat Wave, so that I can check, I can Air Balloon Goldengo, because once Goldengo has no item, it can just recover on Tornadus forever, and I found that was, like, kind of annoying, because if I wanted to, you know, gain momentum with Torn, I'd end up with a stop in Goldengo, and just forcing me to U-turn out into my Pokemon, which don't really do much to it. So yeah, that was my team going into this match. When I went into the match, the first thing is that I noticed were Typhlosion and Bouffalant. I had prepared a lot more for Goldengo than I had Typhlosion, but my way of beating it was like still roughly the same, so I wasn't that concerned, especially because I did calc +2 Earthquake to kill a Typhlosion, and if it's bulkier, then I just try and get hazard damage on it, and if it's boots, it's time to hit a Hydro Pump. And Bouffalant. Bouffalant's actually a big-ass threat, depending on what speed it has, because I did speed creep my Iron Hands to try and surpass Bouffalant, but obviously, if he just goes max speed Bouffalant, then it's really scary. So, I lead off with Iron Mouth, trying to get Toxic Spikes as early as possible, and Matt leads Mew. Mew lead is something that I was like worried about like right before the match, but I just assumed that it was going to be like a Garganacl lead, so this is not great. In an earlier version of this team, I had Focus Sash on Iron Moth so that I could guarantee get T-Spikes and also some damage, but then I decided that I wanted to prioritize 2-hit KOing Garganacl instead. So in this matchup, I just like, instead of going for the damage on Mew, I go for the T-Spikes because I valued that more. Psychic Noise, I thought it was fine until it was absolutely not fine, because this Mew is choice specs, and that OHKOs my Moth. If I had the Sash, then I would have been able to get a little bit of chip on Mew, or get up a second layer of T-Spikes, but instead, I just have one layer of T-Spikes for an entire Pokemon, and that's just gonna have to be okay. So, I bring in Tornadus, trying to threaten a knockoff right here, and I successfully catch the Garganacl, which essentially puts it on timer because it's not recovering residual damage as I play around it defensively. It sets up rocks here, which does make sense. If you have choice specs Mew, then your only other hazards are spikes on Ogerpon and Stealth Rock on Garganacl, and it makes sense to run Stealth Rock on Garganacl. He Terra Poisons his Garganacl as I Swords Dance here, and Salt Cure does absolutely nothing because I'm Covert Cloak. This turn, I was really concerned about him going into Zeraora because Volt Absorb blocks Supercell Slam, which would cause Iron Hands to crash. And I didn't want that to happen, so I instead go for a mid-ground Drain Punch play, which would be safe if not for the fact that Garganacl had Earthquake, which means that I just essentially took a third of my Iron Hands' HP for nothing when I could have just killed this Garganacl. So, knowing that Matt wants to stay in against this Iron Hands, I just go for the Supercell Slam and pick it off. And Matt brings back out the Demon Mew. I go Screamtail because I have that Psychic Resist. That makes it very safe. I still take a good chunk for me being a Screamtail. And I just use this as an opportunity to get up my rocks, since Mew doesn't threaten me very much at all. I thought this Bouffalant was soundproof, because Screamtail sometimes run Boom Burst, but I was like, oh, if it's soundproof, then I don't have to worry about that since I'm not running Boom Burst. And I click Psychic Noise instead, which is still a sound move. I didn't realize this until after I clicked it. It is still a sound move, but Bouffalant wasn't soundproof. But if this Bouffalant was soundproof, then I would have looked like an idiot. And Facade comes out. I was expecting a Reckless Head Charge, which would have been fine, because the recoil damage would have done a lot to Bouffalant and brought it in range of my other attacks, but Facade is really bad, because that means that I'm not really getting a lot of damage on Bouffalant, as I had hoped to when I was thinking about Bouffalant in prep. Now, this turn, I thought it might have been like Assault Vest Bouffalant, so I started calcing, and no, the damage that I did with no offensive investment Screamtail to Bouffalant is about correct. What I didn't look at is that Facade from Bouffalant, even when poisoned, doesn't kill my Screamtail unless this is Choice Band, and Bouffalant did not reveal Life Orb. So, I made a critical error in calcing here. Like, knowing what I know now, what I should have done is gone into Tornadus and click Knock Off, because if I knock it off, then it's not doing as much damage, and I can U-turn, so I get the knockoff damage, one turn of poison damage, the U-turn damage, another turn of poison damage. But instead, I go into Iron Hands because of the like triple speed creep thing that I tried to do. But Bouffalant is faster than my Iron Hands, so yeah, he ran enough speed investment, which means Iron Hands just died for nothing. And that means that a potential switch into Zeraora, depending on what move Zeraora has, is just gone, and I sacked a Pokemon. Which is really bad, because, as you can see, half my team is dead. Iron Moth died quickly, Screamtail died to the Facade, and then I sacked Iron Hands. So I'm immediately on the back foot, because, 3 to 5 is, a big disadvantage. Especially when, rocks are up for my Terapagos, since I'm Lumberry. I go for the Bleakwind Storm here. Thanks to my physical defense, my Tornadus does leave the Facade. If Tornadus didn't leave Facade, I think I immediately lose. Instead, Bouffalant dies to the Poison plus the Bleakwind, and Zeraora comes out here. In hindsight, I probably should have sacked Terapagos to Zeraora and kept my Tornadus around because it's faster than non-Terra Ogerpon, Mew, and Typhlosion. But instead, I just decided to sack Tornadus instead and try and win with Blastoise. Blastoise having the electric type means that Zeraora can't really do much to it besides Taunt. Taunt Zeraora would be an instant loss, So at this point, I was just hoping that it wasn't taunt. It was Life Orb, which doesn't necessarily prove that it isn't taunt, but that means that it's more likely to be something like 4 attacks or like 3 attacks Volt Switch. I know Volt Switch is an attack, it's just like Volt Switch plays a different role than most attacking moves on Physical Zeraora. So, I bring in Blastoise here, just gonna try and Terra, Shell Smash, and Sweep. And luckily, it's not taunt. Knockoff is a little bit annoying because it does do it does do a lot of damage, but that's just Life Orb Zeraora for you. Like, I'm just gonna count my blessings because I did get the Shell Smash, which is important. A quick Earthquake here, just knock out the Zeraora. Ogerpon comes in, but I'm Timid Blastoise, which means that even if Ogerpon could hypothetically Terastallize, I would still be faster and knock it out with a +2 Ice Beam. This turn, Mew comes out. Mew is never dead to Surf here. I don't have Surf. And is dead to most rolls of Hydro Pump. And I decide that if I'm going to win, I need to just KO this Mew, and then I can Earthquake the Typhlosion, like, safely. So, essentially, I pigeonholed myself into the scenario where I have to hit a Hydro Pump to win. And this is not ACDL2 Week 6, because I miss the game-winning Hydro. Yeah, that's almost an instant loss. Specs Mew obviously kills a 40% -1 Typhlosion, and at this point, I was just hoping that Typhlosion wasn't Scarf. No heavy-duty boots means I can't rely on Terra Shell, which means I just have to take a Psychic Noise right to the dome, which does a billion. Thanks to the T-Spike's damage, though, Mew does get knocked out by the Terra Starstorm, and speaking of getting damage on Mew, if my Moth was Sash, I would have been able to damage Mew, and I could have potentially put it in range of one of those moves where I didn't have to risk the Hydro Pump. And that's essentially like the name of the game with this match. As you can see, Typhlosion comes in and takes Rocks, which makes me think that it might be Scarf, so I'm just hoping that it's Modest Scarf at this point. I go to click Dark Pulse, and it's Colbur Berry, which does actually make sense, because I do have a pretty scary Bisharp on my team, but I ended up not bringing it because I valued other Pokemon over Bisharp. But Dark Pulse comes out, doesn't flinch, and Typhlosion closes out the game for Matt. I think Matt played really well. I think that there was a lot that I could have done better. So, like, yes, it was unlucky, but also it didn't have to be unlucky if I had played better. So, GG's to Matt, and I hope to play a bit better week 2. But that's about all I have for today, so thank you everybody, and peace.